Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of my Factorio 1.0 tutorial Let's Play. I'm Xterminator, and thank you for joining me again today. We are back in our factory here, and I have a couple goals in mind for today. Now, it's been a couple days since we did release an episode. Apologize for that. There's been a few other things going on, and the attention and the views on the episodes are decreasing. And I mention that just simply because when the series kind of starts getting, I would say, past episode 20 or so, that starts to happen typically. And I find that if I just keep pumping out like an episode every single day, that it can almost oversaturate things and create a situation where it just kind of hurts the overall series and views and people being able to find the episodes, or rather just watching them because they maybe get overwhelmed. So that's why I'm spacing these out a little more, just because, like I said, as the series tends to go on and the interest, drops off a little maybe, or, just the general view count decreases, I do like to space them out a bit for that reason. Now, what we're going to do here, turn off pollution. The first thing we want to do is connect up this track. Now, until I can landfill this, we don't actually have landfill automated, which maybe is something we should do today. But until we do get that point, we're going to have a little bit of a squiggly track. Now this will not look too great, but it will work perfectly fine. And you can see we're running into stuff here just like any other blueprint or anything. I can just hold shift, and holding shift will make this place as a ghost, as you can see there, and it allows me to draw this pretty much out to any length I want. And if you go move your mouse different directions, it'll make curves and such. But I'm going to do this, and it will mark these things for deconstruction, which is quite nice. And much like other sections of my factory, I like to build this backwards, meaning that I will start from the endpoint of the station here and actually build it back towards where I want to merge it with the main line, just so I can try to get alignment correct at least with the station. Now, obviously, if we had landfill or this water was not here, we would not be dealing with these curves and would have just come straight into here. Now let's tie this in here. Now I can already tell this is most likely going to hit this power line, so we probably will have to move that, but that's okay. So we have our two directions here. Of course, again, right hand drive. We have this one that goes up and then this one that comes down. And we just have one lane for this station. Now again, in the future here, we will be adding a stacker, but that's a different subject that we aren't really quite ready for yet. And we're just going to start with one line here that comes in. We just have the one station. We're going to start with this. Now, we could continue this two-lane. We could do an entire T-junction like this and actually just split this off, like coming this way, and then split it off here. It pretty much just achieves the same thing, just, minimizes the length of this single rail. So to tie this in, we're going to apply the same exact rules for signals that we went over last episode. And it should actually be even simpler since it's not like an entire T-junction we're dealing with. So we want this rail to connect to both lines. Now, an important note here is if you had trains coming from both directions, both from this direction and then from this direction on the main line, you would want to actually tie this in basically 4 times, 2 times to each lane, right? Because you want a way for this to have trains to exit up this way and to enter from down here. And then the same with this, if you had trains coming from both directions. So that's a very important note. We're not going to do that here because it's just unnecessary since we only have the one train coming here, and it's coming from an outpost that is this way. We only need to tie it in one direction to each lane. And for future, we probably won't ever have multiple trains coming to the station, because if we do multiple coal trains in the future, we will probably just have different stations for them. So if we tie this in, you can see I'm just kind of doing this to line up, and I can see we need to come one more out. And you can see it's intersecting the signal there. Now holding shift in this case kind of gets a little bit wonky, so I just remove that, and I tie it in here. So this is allowing the train to obviously leave this direction, which is the direction it needs to go. It needs to drive on this side to get to that top coal outpost. And then we need to tie one into this other section, and as suspected, this power pole will in fact be in the way, so we'll just quickly remove that. And we'll tie it in here. And this allows the train to come from this direction. Remember, we're driving this way, and then go into this line. Now, before we mess with signals, let's go ahead and get our power lines hooked back up again. We don't need to reconnect the signal wires for at least this particular time. And the same rules that we used before apply here. So, wherever we see a rail crossing, we want to put a chain signal before it so that it stops a train before it blocks a junction. And so we see there's a crossing right here, and remembering we're coming this way as a train, so we put a rail signal here, and we can see indicated by the lines that this is the direction we want, or the arrows rather. So we'll put a chain signal here. Now while we're on chain signals, we see another crossing right here. It's the same crossing, but we have to cover every direction, right? So it's not actually a different cross. This is the same one we did here, but we have to cover it for this rail as well. So we place one here. Again, this is so a train doesn't stop and block this entire section. Okay, so we have a or chain signal before the crossing, a chain signal before this crossing, and in this junction, those are the only crossings. Now, we do have a couple merges. We have one merge here, so this line and this line merge together, which means we need a signal here and here before they merge on each line, remember? And then this is technically a merge. It merges into one line, so we're actually going to do a couple things here. One thing we're going to do is, well, there's a couple things we could do here. We could put a signal here, and then what we do need, though, is we actually need to indicate this is a bi-directional line. So we actually need to be putting a signal on either side of this track. Okay, now the reason we actually don't, I put this here to show you this, but we actually don't want this signal here. The reason for that, again, is we're going to encounter something that we just tried to prevent, where if there's a train stopped here, with this normal signal being here, it's actually going to allow a train to come and park right here and block this whole section. Of course, you may be thinking to yourself, well, I just said that there's not going to be more than one train here, and there's not, so in this case it doesn't matter, but just for general good signaling practice, we can remove this and it will work fine. Again, this is now turning red, or we could put another chain signal here and it would achieve the same thing. I usually just kind of leave this unsignaled. It certainly would not hurt to put a chain signal here if you want to be extra safe, but this is working as intended, and there we go. So obviously there is a train at the station, and that's why this is red. Now we could add a few more signals down the line here, just so this is not one entire rail block. If you do this, and this applies to main lines too, you want to try to space your signals out so that the longest length train you have will fit between signals. If I have, this is a 1-2-1 train, so a 4-length train in total. If I were to put this like here, this is just going to defeat the whole purpose of this because, well, maybe not completely defeat it, but if a train stops here, it's actually going to be sticking out, like way out to here, which kind of just doesn't really work, as you might imagine. So we want this to be, at least 4 training sections long, and you can see there, we're actually at 5 now. That seems like a reasonable amount, and we do want to continue this trend of signals on both sides, again, because this is a bi-directional track. We want to make sure that we do in fact have those signals on either side of the track, and this should be sufficient. This is fine. We could stick another one if we want right after the train or before the train, depending what direction you're going, and that's completely fine. And splitting up a track like this is mostly just good when you have multiple trains, because it allows faster throughput, since one train doesn't have to wait until another train completely leaves the entire traction or track section. It can just wait until it passes a signal part. Okay, so there's that. Now, we want to work on some landfill today, but the other thing I wanted to cover today, because I think it's about time, and I'm really thinking it is based on what we're seeing here, is finding and fixing bottlenecks in your factory. So bottlenecks are, I'm pretty sure we all know what the term bottleneck means. It's a shortage of something where like an actual bottleneck. It's, it makes it hard for things to, proceed past it. We all know what the bottleneck term is. So You will have these throughout your Factorio gameplay. I typically find them more in this stage of the game than in the early game, because our production and consumption has just increased so much that we don't really have necessarily enough production at the start point here. Speaking of, let's proceed. Let's see what we can. So our end goal here is actually the rocket silo. This is technically the end goal of the game. So if we go backwards from here and see what we need to research to get to this point, there's actually a fair bit. Concrete, let's go ahead and queue that up. We also needed flammables, so let's queue that up. So the first bottleneck we can identify is copper. In fact, it's a very large bottleneck here that we have. And interestingly, it's actually due to a lack of fuel, which means that it is probably time to tie these lines in. Yes, because it's priority splitting this coal, so not very much is actually making it through here. But if we go through, you can identify bottlenecks a few ways. There are some mods that make it far easier, but if you're playing vanilla, which I would suggest doing for your first time playing, you can kind of just come through and look at lines that are backed up. You can, so if we hadn't noticed it back here, we could notice it here, where we see that this copper cable line is not backed up. And if you look really closely, you can also see that the assemblers aren't working. Turning off the alt info here with the alt key helps. And if you see assemblers not working, but the line also not being backed up, this is a good indicator there's a bottleneck somewhere in this system. And then we could, of course, trace that back to the fact that there's, a lack of copper. And even if you don't have full belts, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a bottleneck, but that can be at least a good first identifier of that. Obviously there's basically zero copper down here, so that's pretty obvious. Once we got copper turned on, let's just say hypothetically we did not have a copper bottleneck. Let's say that our copper was just flowing completely full line down here. I'm sure we would find other bottlenecks somewhere. Another one I imagine we would probably run into would be green circuits. Part of this is maybe because of a copper shortage, but even if we didn't have a copper shortage, I'm pretty sure that we would be having a lack of green circuits about here-ish. We also may be having a steel shortage if we had everything running fully and this was consuming rails at its full rate. But we can go ahead and fix this bottleneck pretty quickly here by tying in the coal. You'll notice, again, that half these smelters are not even working due to a lack of fuel. And we purposely did not tie in that coal earlier, just because it was not needed. But luckily it is here, now that it is required, so we can go ahead and bring this up. One full line should be more than sufficient for that fuel. And we're actually going to redo our splitting here a little bit. What we're going to do is actually, we're going to run this way a bit. Do I have a cliff explosive by chance? I do. This one's been a bit in the way for a while. So we're actually going to do a couple things here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to actually tear this up entirely. And we're going to dedicate this entire coal line to power. Because there's really, if we're adding in a full coal line in addition, there's not really a purpose, in my opinion, to having this splitting again to go to fuel when we already have more fuel than we're going to need for the furnaces. So we're going to bring this in here. Just disconnect this so it lines up slightly better. And of course, this is the fuel for the furnaces and the bus. Now, if we really want to increase our production, there's actually, I think I will actually do this. So what we'll do, bring this over, tie this in here, and we had that second line running. We actually could potentially have even more than that, but we're going to tie this in, and we're just going to feed both coal lines into that splitter. And basically what that's going to achieve is just, in essence, it's going to send one full line to the fuel for the furnaces and one full line down the bus. Now, if we're doing two full lines, you may be wondering why we even need a splitter, and this is just to kind of balance them out a little bit. Again, recall that splitters split, but they also kind of act as balancing units because they just always send 50% each direction without fail unless you change their settings. So this is just also acting as a balancer. We could, of course, just get rid of it and just send two lines. But if one line is lacking, you know, and the other's backed up, this will kind of help fill in the gaps from one to the other. So that's the reason that's there, but this should now be spitting out 2 full belts, which it is, and this should kick on our smelting. Now, in addition to that, looks like we are actually being attacked. Maybe we should just go deal with that anyway. In addition to that, we probably could expand upon our smelting. Get rid of that guy there. We already have this belt out, thanks to our robots, and while our copper is lacking, you'll notice this line is backed up. A lot of these miners are in fact not working at all, simply just due to the fact that the line is backed up. So we could, now part of this could be that this didn't have fuel, so it's not actually fully consuming it. And this is probably something we should just keep an eye on for a minute before just turning on another one. I'd say this is kind of a good practice throughout your factory. That, you know, if you have a shortage somewhere and then something like this is backed up, you may want to wait until the shortage is fixed before you decide to take what seems like an excess and just turn on even more production. Because I actually would be willing to bet that this is going to seem not as backed up now that all these furnaces have fuel. And we'll prepare this though. Looks like I rearranged some power poles incorrectly, unfortunately. We did finish that research. And we can see what else we need. I know we will need rocket fuel, of course, to put into a rocket. If we scroll back up here, there's a few other things. Speed modules. Let's go ahead and queue that up. It's very cheap research, luckily. Now, we will need a train for copper, because this copper patch is fully tapped. There's not very much to it. And there's a few options. There's a very nice one down here that is very accessible from this main line if we extend it down. There's also one right here, which is also quite accessible from a main line. And it really doesn't matter. I'm tempted to go to this one simply because it's bigger. It'll be a bit longer lasting. Now, we do have a completely full line coming through here. However, you can see the minute it actually splits off to circuits, it's already down to half a line, and then it's already down half again to probably not even a quarter of a line here. So that is something to, you know, no, it helps. Obviously, having a full line here will have more circuits, but it's really not going to help this, and that's why we need a second line. However, before we do that, let's look into getting some landfill made. We can throw this over on our mall here, since we don't have stone brought over yet, but we can easily do that. If we decide where we want to put this in our area here, when we have this assembler set, I wanted it for perhaps something else that would require these resources, but I think we're probably okay with just doing it here. So we take landfill, and landfill, again, is very expensive, actually, stone-wise, at least. It requires 20 stone per one landfill. And we haven't really used landfill very much yet, but you'll see, once we do use it, that landfill, one square of landfill is not very much at all. It covers far less than you may think it. I mean, it's the one tile, so it covers that much, basically. And sometimes even less, depending on how finicky it is. So it's very expensive to make any reasonable amount of landfill. Now, luckily, stone is, of course, not used for very much else, so we can dedicate a fair bit of it here to landfill. And I'm using 2 inserters, again, because it requires 20. It's a half-second craft. Even with this, we're not going to be able to insert that 20 stone every half second, but it's, of course, twice as fast as just having 1 inserter. Now, we could upgrade these to stack inserters, and maybe this would be a good opportunity to show those off. Make sure this isn't super dangerous. So if we place a stack inserter here, we'll notice a few differences. This guy here has a default stack size of 2. You can override this by clicking this box and just changing that number. If we click on this, you'll notice it has a stack size now of 4. So this stack inserter automatically is picking up double what this one's picking up. Again, you can override it. However, with research, if we find research like this one that actually goes all the way to 7, this increases stack inserter capacity more and more, as you can see. And even so, these later ones actually increase it by 2 each. And I believe this goes all the way up to 11 per thing. So you can see, it's easier to see when he can grab even more, but you can see he's actually grabbing, taking an extra second there faster than the fast or longer than the fast inserter to grab, because he's actually picking up 4 items per go per swing here, which is you know, pretty helpful. In some ways, it actually is a detriment. There's been some experiments where you actually need to reduce the size to have stack inserters provide a full output belt, because if you leave them at their maximum 11 or just max size, that it will actually create gaps in your belt because it takes them so long to like place down the items and then swing back. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. So rocket fuel is going a bit slow. It is a slower research. It's 45-second per cycle research. Copper is making it down here a bit better, though, you'll notice, which is quite good. All of our packs are backed up just because we haven't been doing research for a while. We will notice that these, some of these labs are not working, so it looks like we perhaps need to add some inserters here, it looks like. Probably ran out or something. We are being attacked again. Let's take a look here. Could be from this base. I think before we go grab that big copper patch, we probably want to clear that one base that I just mentioned. See now you can see exactly what I was talking about, that these smelters are actually not working fully. This is not quite providing a full line, even though it looked like we had excess. And you can just visually see that there's some gaps here and there, and as minimal of a difference as that may seem, it is a big enough difference to make, you know, full 8 furnaces or so not work. And there's unfortunately not much else we can do with this patch. This patch is pretty fully tapped out. I could do a trick I think I mentioned before, where you run underground belts between miners like this, and this allows you to place the power poles in here rather than behind them, which actually allows you to butt the miners up against each other and put more in here. Personally, I don't really do that. I just don't find it worth it. We could fit maybe another row of miners on here. I'd prefer to just invest my time and resources to go get another copper patch. Let's just look around, see if anything else is bottlenecked. Liquids potentially could be. Looks like maybe a shortage of lubricant, but I think it's probably just stopped. Actually, not based on the pump. I don't know why we're not making more lubricant, because the pump theoretically should have a red light on it if it's turned off. Let's take a look at power here. So power actually is something we could probably expand at least just a little bit. Grab a little more iron here, because, you know, last thing we want to do is run out of power. That's always a pretty bad situation. Iron also is struggling a bit. So we really should just go secure. We need to secure several outposts. We need to secure, ideally, a copper and an iron outpost. Let's make one more of these, a few pipes. Actually don't need pipes anymore because I have these bigger power poles. Let's just go ahead and put those here and here. So adding 4 more steam engines is quite good. That's another almost 4 megawatts since they provide that 900 kilowatts apiece. As you can see, our stone is looking very sad at the moment. We could massively increase our stone production, and I think we will. We do have miners automated, so I'm going to go ahead and grab some of these. I'm actually just going to grab all of them, since we will need them for setting up any sort of outpost we may want. I'm also going to come over here and grab some rail, since we were running low. We can probably continue to extend our rail line out towards one of those outposts, because, you know, this is creating a fairly severe shortage of production in our base, which is something we don't want. And to be perfectly honest, being on only one smelter at this, or one smelting column at this part of the game, is actually pretty minimal. Had we been just constantly 100% of the time doing research, we would have noticed, we would have had these problems significantly earlier. The fact we're just on one smelting column for this late into the game, I would say is just really very, very minimal. I don't know. The word that keeps coming into my mind is like sad, but I think it's just because we hadn't been doing research the full time, since I was explaining, you know, things quite a lot, that you know, typically the consumption would have far exceeded the production of one smelter column, at least for me. in this point of the game. So I find it kind of interesting we're still somehow surviving off of that one. Now, you know, again, if you are just on one smelter column at this point of the game, or even if you just beat the game with a smelter column of each resource, which you certainly can do, we could do it. It would just take a while. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I said the word that came to mind is sad. That's just for my own kind of threshold that I have for myself. There's nothing wrong. You can, you know, I always like to emphasize, you can play the game however you want. You can play the game to whatever scale you want. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I'm going to extend this out for redundancy. We, of course, have power already here and on the main line, but just having power redundancy, as I think, is really important. You know, in case you accidentally remove something or if something gets attacked, it's really great to have that redundancy here. Now let's go ahead and extend this rail out. So if we swap over here, go this way, and place that down. Now we can test building this from the map. You can see when we do this, it's just lining up just like that. Now, of course, I need vision of this, so I can't go out too far, unfortunately. And even with our fairly slow, minimal amount of bots, you know, this is, at least in my opinion, much faster than me placing this by hand. You know, just because it can do multiple sections at once. Now, this is a bit of an interesting situation where the mainline rail is actually really quite close to this patch, so we can't just like place this here, right? It's going to be right on top of the patch. So this is where, you know, there's actually still multiple ways we can do this, but this is where we maybe need to get a little bit more creative, which are with our junctions and split-offs. And, you know, again, we can make a choice between either doing a full T-junction off for this or doing just something as we've done here. And that's really personal preference at this point. If I were building, say, if I were, you know, if this were at a mega base stage, like, say, 100 hours from now, I would very much want to do a T-junction just for the upgradability, throughput-wise and stuff. For this, I think it is absolutely acceptable to just do a one little merge like this, you know, because we're only ever going to have this copper train going up. There's going to be no reason for it to be going down from this outpost, at least that I can possibly foresee in this playthrough. There's just no reason that I would ever want to be sending it down from this outpost. So it doesn't really make sense, for, at least in my mind, to put a T-junction here. It doesn't hurt by any means, but I do not think it's necessary. Let's just continue our research. I mean, we're obviously consuming resources and making our bottlenecks even worse, but that's, you know, we are in the process of fixing them. We might as well use what we have, right? So we'll just go ahead and set this up. And this is, I think I talked about it briefly before, but this is another patch that it's actually fairly square as far as resource patches go. So, you know, ones that are more elongated, I like to build the miners like the longest rows I can get. So this one, while it may seem square, this is actually a bit more rectangular. So I would like to build my miners left to right in rows because I can get longer rows that way. This one, it doesn't really matter that much. It seems to be just about the same regardless of how I do it. And again, I start in the middle, even though that may not make sense, because to start with, you know, usually when I build an outpost, I'm wanting as much resources from it as I possibly can get, like when I build it initially. So I want to just start with the maximum amount I can get on here. And then, you know, once we bring a few more miners over here and stuff like that, we can, of course, just fill in on the sides. But let's just say we were in absolutely desperate need for the copper and, you know, just need it right now. This would be the best method then, you know, because this is just going to give us the most we can get, opposed to just putting like 5 miners here and then moving inwards and only, you know, just having kind of a weird... I mean, it is the same amount of miners. Obviously, I'm using the same amount regardless of how I place them. But it's less belts. It's less messy to balance them with just 2 lines rather than like 4 small lines and stuff. It just initially, in my mind, makes the most sense. Speaking of balancing, I'm going to build a 4-way balancer. We've built these quite a few times. Now, I could copy-paste, create a blueprint, and actually now that I have robots, I think I will do that. I wasn't doing it before because I didn't have robots, and I would just the result would be the same, me just placing them by hand. But we can build that, obviously much faster. Sometimes I choose to build them by hand just to keep it fresh in my memory. But there we go. And I'm leaving these two blank because we know we will have at least one row on either side of this, so these can tie in here. Now the question comes into mind of how are we going to have this load? Where are we going to have this train go? Now there's a few options. We actually are in a bit of a tricky spot for several reasons. I already mentioned the one because the rail's close, but the thing I didn't mention initially because I actually didn't notice is this cliff is really quite close to here, which kind of eliminates any option of like coming in through here until we blow up the cliff. And we also have water on this side, which kind of eliminates extending out this way without a large amount of landfill. Now, of course, we are being attacked while I'm out here. Seems to be a trend. We'll just drive our car back, no big deal. I do need to go back anyway to get some supplies, so that's fairly convenient. You will remember earlier in the series I would just let things get killed because I didn't want to run all the way back. This is actually a case where I do want to come back because the smelting is pretty important and they're destroying a fairly large amount of it. If they were just like blowing up the belt, I really wouldn't worry that much about it. But this is actually something I really want, so let's go ahead and just place a couple turrets here anyway. Kind of make some furnaces. The robots will replace it. Some repair packs, and they will use those as well. And it looks like we need to do some more biter clearing now. Where these guys came from, I'm guessing is here. I don't know why on earth they would choose to come this way rather than attack this outpost that's right next to them. They could have come from over here, though. This base is probably being hit, I think. They could have come there. It's always a little difficult to tell sometimes when you have such an expansive area covered by pollution like this in a fairly open base. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to tell which direction they actually came from, which base they may be coming from. But at least we took care of them. We'll have to go deal with that. I'll probably try to do that off camera. We've done enough biter killing for a good while, I'd say. And I think this is actually a decent place to end this episode. It feels like it's been about a good time. I do want to route the rail for that outpost on camera, though, because I want to kind of show some options for how you can, deal with a fairly tight situation like this with an outpost and how to split off. But yeah, we will bring that copper in, and we need to find some iron as well. There is this iron outpost here. Slightly inconvenient, because I really don't want to run a rail all the way over here, but there is this one, which I think we'll just belt in. I think that's actually what my plan was. I keep forgetting this one is right by our base. We'll probably just throw some miners on, and this is like literally in our base almost. So we can just throw some miners and just belt this straight over into here. Probably add another iron smelter as well. Definitely add another copper smelter, and that should help our production quite a lot. So I think that is a good place to call it, guys. I hope you found this enjoyable and helpful. We covered quite a few topics. So if you have any questions and stuff, let me know. But if you did enjoy it and find it helpful, a like is much appreciated so other people can find the video in series and hopefully find it helpful too. If you're new to the game, I want to give you a huge welcome, and I hope you're having a fantastic time with it, enjoying all the videos, mine and other people's you're finding. And if you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe if you aren't already to keep up with all the new content I am putting out. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you all, and do take care.